Welcome back to What If I Was Reborn as Wally West in Young Justice as the Harem King. Like and subscribe for the next part. Let begin. Setting down her smoothie. Most young heroes either try to emulate their mentors exactly or rebel against their teachings entirely. You seem to have found a third path. What makes you say that? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. You demonstrate tactical thinking that suggests extensive study of military strategy, but you consistently prioritize team welfare over mission efficiency. You show confidence in your abilities, but defer to others when their expertise exceeds your own. Most telling, you treat leadership as a responsibility rather than a privilege. Marcus felt his cheeks warm under her analytical gaze. That's a very thorough evaluation from one training session. I am a warrior and a diplomat, Diana replied with a slight smile. Reading people is part of both skill sets. The question that interests me is where you learned such mature leadership philosophy at such a young age. From 26 years of corporate middle management and watching you make the same kinds of decisions in a cartoon. Obviously not something he could say out loud. Trial and error, mostly, Marcus said instead. Plus watching other leaders and trying to figure out what worked and what didn't. Such as. Marcus considered the question carefully. Well, Batman's strategic planning is incredible, but his emotional distance can be isolating for his team. Superman's inspirational leadership is amazing, but sometimes he takes on too much responsibility himself. The Flash is great at making people feel valued, but he can be impulsive about tactical decisions. And what have you observed about my leadership style? Diana asked with obvious amusement. That you're basically the perfect combination of tactical brilliance, emotional intelligence, and moral clarity, and watching you in action is both inspiring and slightly intimidating. Asterisk. You lead by example, Marcus said. You don't ask people to do things you wouldn't do yourself, but you also trust them to be capable of rising to the occasion. Plus you actually listen to other people's input instead of just pretending to. Such flattery, Diana said, but she looked pleased. Though I notice you avoided mentioning my flaws. What flaws? Marcus asked, then caught himself. I mean, everyone has areas for improvement, but from what I've observed, you're pretty much the gold standard for leadership. Diana laughed, a rich, warm sound that made Marcus's chest tighten in ways he tried not to analyze. You are either very diplomatic or very inexperienced with Amazon politics, she said. I can be stubborn, prideful, and occasionally too quick to resort to direct confrontation when subtlety would be more effective. Okay, those are fair points, Marcus admitted. But as flaws go, they're pretty manageable ones. Stubbornness can be determination from a different angle, pride isn't always bad if it's earned, and sometimes direct confrontation is the right call. You are being kind. I'm being honest, Marcus replied. You're one of the most impressive people I've ever met, flaws and all. Their eyes met across the table, and Marcus felt the air between them shift in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Diana was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, part curiosity, part assessment, and part something that might have been interest. You are an interesting young man, Marcus Chen, she said softly. The sound of his real name on her lips sent electricity down his spine. How did you? I have excellent hearing, Diana replied with a slight smile. Also, Batman conducted a very thorough background check when you joined the team. I may have reviewed the file. And what did you think of what you read? That official files rarely tell the whole story, Diana said. They can tell you what someone has done, but not who they are. And you, I think, are someone with hidden depths. Before Marcus could figure out how to respond to that, the cave's alarm system activated, filling the air with urgent electronic beeping. Saved by the crisis, Diana observed with obvious amusement. Story of my life, Marcus muttered, but he was grateful for the interruption. Another few minutes of that conversation and he might have said something he'd regret. The crisis turned out to be a prison break at Belle Reve, not unusual in itself, but complicated by the fact that the escapees included several metahumans with powers that complemented each other in dangerous ways. Killer Frost, Heat Wave, and Captain Cold, Batman reported during the emergency briefing. They've taken hostages and are demanding safe passage out of the country. Ironic team composition, Robin observed. Fire and ice working together. Tactically sound, though, Marcus said, studying the situation report. Killer Frost can create barriers and defensive positions, Heatwave can handle offensive capabilities, and Captain Cold provides crowd control and area denial. They've covered their major tactical vulnerabilities. What do you recommend? Aqualad asked. Marcus looked at the assembled team, himself, Robin, Aqualad, Superboy, Miss Martian, Artemis, Supergirl, and now Wonder Woman. More than enough firepower to handle 3 metahuman criminals, but the hostage situation complicated things significantly. Multi-pronged approach, he said after a moment. We need to divide their attention while creating opportunities for hostage extraction. Robin and I can create distractions and confusion. Aqualad and Artemis can provide precision support. Superboy and Supergirl can handle direct confrontation if negotiations fail. Miss Martian can coordinate telepathically and provide stealth capabilities. And me? Wonder Woman asked. Marcus met her gaze. You're our ace in the hole. If everything goes wrong, you're powerful enough to end the fight quickly and skilled enough to do it without endangering the hostages. You want me to hold back? I want you to be ready for anything, Marcus clarified. Sometimes the best tactical deployment is letting people think they know what you're capable of, then exceeding those expectations when it matters. Diana smiled. I approve of this plan. The mission went smoother than expected. The criminal team's tactical coordination was good, but not great, and they hadn't planned for the level of strategic thinking the team brought to bear. Within 2 hours, all 3 were back in custody and the hostages were safe. Well executed, Diana said during the post-mission debrief. The tactical coordination was impressive, and the decision-making under pressure was sound. Thanks to good leadership, Supergirl said, glancing meaningfully at Marcus. Team effort, Marcus replied automatically. Everyone did their part. Some more than others, Artemis added with a knowing smile. After the debrief, as the team dispersed to their various post-mission routines, Diana approached Marcus in the cave's main corridor. Walk with me, she said. They ended up on the beach outside Mount Justice, watching the sunset paint the Atlantic in shades of gold and crimson. The domestic tranquility of it felt surreal after the afternoon's combat operation. You did well today, Diana said eventually. Thank you. The team makes it easy. The team follows you because you've earned their trust and respect, Diana corrected. That's not easy to achieve, especially at your age. Marcus felt that familiar tightness in his chest. I'm just trying to do right by them. I know. That's what makes you interesting. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rhythm of the waves. Eventually, Diana spoke again. I will be spending more time at Mount Justice in the coming weeks, she said. The Justice League believes the team is ready for more advanced training. That's great, Marcus said, and meant it. The team can learn a lot from you. And what about you, Marcus? What would you like to learn? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus looked at Diana's profile against the sunset and felt his carefully maintained emotional equilibrium wobble dangerously. Everything you're willing to teach, he said honestly. Diana turned to look at him, and there was something in her expression that made Marcus's breath catch. Everything, she asked softly. Everything, he confirmed. The moment stretched between them, pregnant with possibility and danger and the kind of emotional complexity that Marcus was definitely not equipped to handle. Then Diana smiled, an expression that was equal parts warmth and promise and something that might have been affection. Then we shall see what can be learned, she said. As they walked back toward Mount Justice, Marcus found himself thinking about hidden depths, tactical deployments, and the increasingly complicated mathematics of attraction across age gaps that technically didn't exist but felt emotionally relevant anyway. This is definitely getting out of hand, he thought. But maybe that's exactly where I want to be. Arc 2, Deeper Waters chapters 13 to 24. Chapter 11, The Perfect Facade. 3 months into his tenure with the team, Marcus had achieved something he'd never managed in his previous life. He was universally well-liked, professionally respected, and romantically successful. It should have felt like a triumph. Instead, it felt like walking on a tightrope over an increasingly deep canyon. The problem wasn't that his teammates disliked him, quite the opposite. Robin sought out his tactical advice, Aqualad deferred to his strategic assessments, Superboy actually smiled when he was around. Miss Martian laughed at his jokes, Artemis trusted him with her secrets, and both Supergirl and Wonder Woman looked at him with expressions that made his pulse race. The problem was that their affection was based on a carefully curated version of himself that was becoming harder to maintain. "You're too perfect," Zatana said during what was supposed to be a casual conversation after a joint training session. Marcus nearly choked on his post-workout protein shake. "Excuse me. You heard me." Zatana floated cross-legged in the air beside him, her dark eyes studying his face with uncomfortable intensity. "You're too perfect. Always saying the right thing, always making the smart tactical call, always being considerate of everyone's feelings. It's weird." "Since when is being considerate weird?" "Since it never fails," Zatana replied. "Nobody's that emotionally intelligent all the time. Nobody's that tactically brilliant without making occasional mistakes. And nobody's that good at reading people without having some kind of angle." Marcus felt a familiar chill run down his spine. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Zatana said. "I'm observing. And what I observe is someone who's working very hard to be exactly what everyone else needs him to be. Maybe I'm just trying to be a good teammate. Or maybe you're trying so hard to be perfect that you've forgotten how to be real." Before Marcus could formulate a response, Supergirl landed beside them with her usual effortless grace. "Hey guys," she said, her smile bright enough to power a small city. "What are you talking about?" "Just discussing the fascinating psychology of overachievement," Zatana replied with obvious amusement. "Sounds riveting," Supergirl said dryly. "Marcus, can I steal you for a few minutes? I wanted to run something by you." Marcus shot a grateful look at the interruption and followed Supergirl to a more private section of the cave. She settled on a bench overlooking the water, patting the space beside her in invitation. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked as he sat down. "That's what I wanted to ask you," Supergirl replied. "You've seemed distracted lately, more so than usual." "Because I'm juggling romantic tension with half the team while maintaining a fake identity and trying not to break the timeline. Just thinking about tactical improvements, mission efficiency, that kind of thing." "Tactical improvements," Supergirl repeated flatly. "Right. What's that tone supposed to mean?" "It means you're deflecting," Supergirl said gently. "Again, you do that a lot, you know. Whenever someone tries to have a real conversation with you, you redirect to tactical analysis or team dynamics." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "I don't know what you mean." "See, you just did it again." Supergirl shifted to face him more directly. "Marcus, we've been working together for months. I've seen you make split-second tactical decisions that save lives, coordinate complex team maneuvers under pressure, and consistently prioritize everyone else's well-being over your own. But I've never seen you just be yourself." "This is myself," Marcus protested. "Is it?" Supergirl's blue eyes searched his face. "Because sometimes I catch glimpses of something else. Like there's someone underneath all the tactical analysis and considerate responses who's carrying something heavy." "You have no idea." Marcus tried to arrange his features into something resembling calm confidence. "Everyone carries something heavy in our line of work," he said carefully. "True. But most people don't carry it alone." The observation hit closer to home than Marcus was comfortable with. He'd spent 3 months building relationships with his teammates, but always as the supportive one, the tactical coordinator, the person who helped solve other people's problems. He'd never let anyone close enough to see his own vulnerabilities. Partly because those vulnerabilities were too complicated to explain, but partly because he'd gotten so used to being the competent one that he'd forgotten how to ask for help. "I'm not alone," he said. "I have the team." "You have teammates," Supergirl corrected. "That's not the same thing as having people who really know you." Before Marcus could respond, his communicator buzzed with an emergency alert. "Priority Alpha. All team members report to mission briefing immediately." "Saved by the crisis," Supergirl observed, echoing Diana's words from earlier. "Story of my life," Marcus replied, but this time the interruption felt less like salvation and more like postponing the inevitable. The mission briefing was conducted by Batman himself, which meant the situation was either very serious or very sensitive. Possibly both. Intelligence suggests that the Light is planning a major operation, Batman began without preamble. We don't have specifics, but multiple sources indicate significant coordination between known members of the organization. Marcus felt his blood pressure spike. The Light, the shadowy conspiracy that had been manipulating events behind the scenes throughout the show's run. He knew more about their operations than anyone else in the room, but using that knowledge without revealing its source was becoming increasingly difficult. What kind of operation? Aqualad asked. Unknown, Batman replied, but the timing suggests it may be connected to the recent prison breaks and metahuman trafficking incidents we've been investigating. Coordinated destabilization, Marcus said, the words out of his mouth before he could stop them. Create chaos in multiple locations to spread our response thin, then strike at the primary target while we're distracted. Everyone turned to look at him. That's a very specific assessment, Wonder Woman observed. Shit, Marcus tried to backtrack without looking suspicious. It's basic asymmetric warfare theory, he said. When you're outnumbered or outgunned, you use misdirection to create advantageous conditions. The Light has used similar strategies before. When have they used similar strategies? Batman asked, his voice carrying that particular tone that suggested Marcus was about to be interrogated by the world's greatest detective. Marcus felt sweat gather at his temples. This was exactly the kind of situation where his meta-knowledge became dangerous. He knew too much, and explaining how he knew it without revealing his true situation was nearly impossible. The Injustice League operations showed similar patterns, he said carefully. Multiple simultaneous attacks designed to overwhelm our response capabilities. It was technically true, but Marcus could see Batman's expression growing more suspicious. Robin looked confused, Aqualad appeared thoughtful, and both Supergirl and Wonder Woman were studying him with uncomfortable intensity. You seem very confident in this assessment, Batman said. It's just pattern recognition, Marcus replied, hoping his voice sounded steadier than it felt. Pattern recognition that suggests you have more information about the Light's operations than your official briefings would provide, Batman continued relentlessly. The room fell silent. Marcus could feel his carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble under the weight of Batman's scrutiny and his teammates' growing suspicion. This is it, he thought. This is where everything falls apart. Chapter 12, Cracks in the Foundation. The interrogation, because that's what it was, regardless of Batman's polite terminology, took place in Mount Justice's most secure conference room. Just Marcus, Batman, and a recording device that probably cost more than Marcus's previous annual salary. Let's start with something simple, Batman said, settling into the chair across from him with that particular stillness that suggested absolute confidence. How did you know the Light would use coordinated destabilization tactics? Marcus had spent the past 30 minutes trying to formulate an answer that wouldn't completely destroy his cover story. He'd failed spectacularly. Lucky guess, he offered. Batman's expression didn't change, which was somehow more intimidating than if he'd shown visible annoyance. Your lucky guesses have been remarkably consistent, Batman continued. 14 out of 15 accurate threat assessments. Tactical predictions that have proven correct in every major engagement. Knowledge of enemy psychology that suggests either extensive study or personal experience. I read a lot of tactical manuals. Which tactical manuals recommend the specific countermeasures you suggested for Dr. Psyche's equipment? Shit. Marcus tried to remember what he'd actually said during that mission debrief. In the heat of the moment, he'd drawn on knowledge that definitely didn't come from any textbook. I improvised based on the situation, he said. Improvisation based on what expertise? This was the problem with being interrogated by Batman. Every answer led to 3 new questions, each more difficult than the last. Marcus felt like he was playing chess against someone who could see 12 moves ahead while he was still trying to understand the rules. Look, Marcus said, abandoning subtlety entirely. I'm good at reading patterns and predicting outcomes. Maybe I'm better at it than most people my age. That doesn't mean I'm hiding some dark secret. Doesn't it? Batman activated a holographic display that showed a timeline of Marcus's activities since joining the team. Every mission, every tactical recommendation, every accurate prediction was highlighted in red. Your success rate is statistically impossible without additional information, Batman continued. Either you have access to intelligence sources you haven't disclosed, or you have some form of precognitive ability you haven't reported. Or I watched all of this happen in a TV show and I'm trying very hard not to break the timeline. Obviously not something he could say. What if it's neither? Marcus asked. What if I'm just really good at tactical analysis? Then you're the most naturally gifted strategic mind I've encountered outside of Lex Luthor, Batman replied. Which raises its own questions about your background and motivations. Before Marcus could respond, the conference room door opened and Wonder Woman entered. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her posture that suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with the current situation. Batman, she said formally. I need to speak with you privately. We're in the middle of a security evaluation. Which is exactly what I need to discuss with you, Diana replied firmly. Batman studied her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes, he told Marcus. Don't leave this room. As soon as the door closed behind them, Marcus slumped forward in his chair and tried to figure out how badly he'd screwed everything up. His carefully maintained cover was falling apart, his teammates were starting to suspect him of something, and he had no idea how to fix any of it without making everything worse. The sound of raised voices from the corridor suggested that Batman and Wonder Woman were having a disagreement about something. Marcus couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably tense. 5 minutes turned into 10, then 15. Marcus spent the time trying to construct plausible explanations for his tactical abilities that didn't involve interdimensional knowledge of fictional events. He wasn't having much success. When the door finally opened, it was Wonder Woman who entered, not Batman. Where's, Marcus began. He's reviewing case files, Diana said, settling into the chair Batman had vacated. I convinced him that this conversation might be more productive with a different approach. What kind of different approach? Diana was quiet for a moment, studying his face with those penetrating dark eyes. The kind where we acknowledge that everyone on this team has secrets, she said finally. And that having secrets doesn't necessarily make someone a security risk. Marcus felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. I take it you disagreed with Batman's interrogation methods. I disagreed with his assumptions, Diana corrected. He believes that unusual tactical ability must indicate hidden information or ulterior motives. I believe that some people are simply gifted with strategic insight. And which interpretation do you think is correct? I think, Diana said carefully, that you're someone who cares deeply about protecting people and has developed exceptional abilities in service of that goal. Whether those abilities come from natural talent, extensive study, or some other source is less important than how you choose to use them. It was a lifeline, and Marcus grabbed it gratefully. Thank you, he said quietly. However, Diana continued, I also think that carrying secrets alone is a heavy burden. And that sometimes, the people who care about you can offer support if you let them. God, she's perceptive. Marcus met her gaze directly, seeing genuine concern mixed with something that might have been affection. Some secrets are harder to share than others, he said. I understand. But Marcus. Diana leaned forward slightly, her expression growing more serious. If you're in trouble, if you need help with something, the team is here for you. I'm here for you. The simple offer of support hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. For 3 months, he'd been the one offering help, providing tactical guidance, supporting his teammates through their various crises. Having someone offer to support him in return felt both foreign and desperately needed. I know, he said. And I appreciate that more than you realize. Good. Diana stood, her movement fluid and graceful. Batman has agreed to suspend his investigation pending further evidence of actual security concerns. However, he will be watching you more closely. Understood. Marcus. Diana paused at the door. Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone forever. After she left, Marcus sat in the empty conference room and tried to process the day's events. His cover story was damaged but not destroyed. Batman was suspicious but not actively hostile. Wonder Woman was offering support that he desperately wanted but couldn't safely accept. Most concerning of all, his teammates were starting to see through the perfect facade he'd constructed, recognizing the person underneath who was carrying secrets too heavy to share. I need to figure this out, he thought. Before everything falls apart completely. But as he walked back toward the main areas of Mount Justice, Marcus realized that part of him was almost relieved. Maintaining the perfect facade had been exhausting. Maybe it was time to let people see some of his actual flaws and vulnerabilities. Just not the ones that would break the universe, he reminded himself. Some secrets really do have to stay secret. Chapter 13, Team Dynamics and Personal Revelations. The aftermath of Batman's interrogation created a subtle shift in team dynamics that Marcus felt acutely but couldn't quite define. It wasn't hostility, his teammates still trusted his tactical judgment and included him in their social activities. But there was a new undercurrent of curiosity, as if everyone was suddenly aware that there were depths to Kid Flash they hadn't previously noticed. "You've been quiet today," Miss Martian observed during their morning training session. Marcus paused in his stretching routine. "Just thinking about tactical improvements." "You always say that," Robin pointed out from where he was practicing acrobatic maneuvers on the cave's obstacle course. "Maybe try saying what you're actually thinking for once." "I am saying what I'm actually thinking." "No, you're saying what you think we want to hear," Artemis corrected, not looking up from her equipment maintenance. "There's a difference." Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure slip slightly. "Since when did everyone become experts on my thought processes?" "Since we started paying attention," Superboy said bluntly. "You analyze everyone else constantly, but you never let anyone analyze you." "Maybe because there's nothing particularly interesting to analyze," Marcus replied, aiming for light and casual. "Or maybe because you're afraid of what we might find," Supergirl suggested gently. The conversation was heading into dangerous territory. Marcus stood up, brushing off his workout clothes with more attention than the task required. "I'm going to work on speed drills," he announced. "Anyone who wants tactical feedback on their techniques is welcome to join." It was a transparent attempt to redirect the conversation away from his personal psychology and back to professional development. Usually, it worked. Today, nobody moved. "KF, Aqualad said quietly, we are your friends. If something is troubling you, perhaps we can help." The genuine concern in Calder's voice made Marcus's chest tighten. These people, these fictional characters who had somehow become the most real relationships in his life, were offering support that he desperately wanted but couldn't safely accept. "Nothing's troubling me," Marcus insisted. "I'm fine." "You keep saying that," Zatana observed from where she was levitating nearby, "but your body language suggests otherwise." "My body language?" "Defensive posturing, increased muscle tension, elevated stress indicators," McGann added with apologetic gentleness. "I'm not reading your mind, but your surface emotions are complicated." Marcus realized he was surrounded by people with supernatural senses and analytical abilities that made hiding his emotional state nearly impossible. Robin's detective training, McGann's telepathic sensitivity, Zatana's magical perception, Supergirl's enhanced hearing and vision, they could probably detect micro-expressions and physiological changes he wasn't even aware of. "Okay," he said, raising his hands in surrender. "Maybe I have been a little stressed lately. But it's nothing I can't handle." "Why do you assume you have to handle it alone?" Wonder Woman asked as she entered the training area. Marcus turned to find Diana approaching with that fluid grace that made it seem like she was floating slightly above the ground. She wore her training uniform and carried an expression of gentle concern that made his pulse quicken. "Because some problems don't have easy solutions," Marcus replied. "Most problems worth solving don't have easy solutions," Diana countered. "That doesn't mean you shouldn't accept help when it's offered. What if accepting help means making the problem worse? Then you trust the people who care about you to help you find a better way." The room fell silent. Marcus could feel everyone watching him, waiting to see if he would finally let them past the carefully maintained barriers he'd constructed around his emotional life. "I could tell them something," he thought. "Not the whole truth, but something real. Something that explains why I'm always holding back. Asterisk. I'm not who you think I am, he said finally. None of us are, Robin replied immediately. That's kind of the point of secret identities. No, I mean, Marcus struggled to find words that were true without being revealing. I mean, I'm not the person I pretend to be. The confident tactical genius, the guy who always knows what to say, the perfect teammate who never makes mistakes. That's not real. That's just performance. So who are you really? Supergirl asked softly. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of people who had become more important to him than he'd ever intended. How could he explain that he was a 26-year-old office worker who'd been trapped in a teenager's body and thrust into a world where the stakes were literally life and death? How could he tell them that everything he knew about their enemies, their futures, their personal struggles came from watching them as entertainment? I'm someone who's in over his head, he said instead. Someone who's trying very hard not to let people down, but who's terrified that he's going to fail anyway. That's the most honest thing you've said since I met you, Artemis observed. Also, welcome to being human. We're all terrified of letting people down. Even you, Marcus asked, genuinely surprised. Especially me. Do you have any idea how terrifying it is to be the daughter of a supervillain working with the good guys? Every mistake I make, every bad decision, every moment of weakness, it all gets filtered through. Is she going to turn out like her father? That's different, Marcus protested. Your situation is complicated by family history and circumstances beyond your control. Diana interrupted. That sounds familiar. Marcus felt his defenses crumbling under the weight of their understanding. These people knew about carrying secrets, about the pressure of living up to expectations, about the fear of disappointing people who believed in you. What if I told you that everything I know, everything I've accomplished, is based on information I shouldn't have? Marcus asked carefully. You mean like having access to classified intelligence? Robin asked. Or inside knowledge from an unexpected source? Aqualad suggested. Something like that, Marcus said, grateful for their willingness to interpret his confession charitably. Then we'd probably ask if that information was helping you protect people or hurt them, Supergirl said simply. Protect them. Definitely protect them. Then the source matters less than the application, Wonder Woman concluded. Good people use whatever advantages they have in service of noble goals. Marcus stared at them, stunned by their acceptance. He'd been so afraid of their judgment, so certain that his deception would destroy their trust, that he'd never considered they might choose to focus on his actions rather than his methods. You're not going to ask what kind of information or where I got it? He asked. Do you want to tell us? McGann asked gently. Marcus considered the question. He couldn't tell them the whole truth, but maybe he could share enough to ease the burden of secrecy without breaking the universe. Someday, he said, when I figure out how to explain it without making everything worse. Fair enough, Robin said. But in the meantime, maybe you could trust us enough to stop pretending to be perfect. I can work on that, Marcus admitted. Good, Diana said with a smile that made his chest warm. Because perfection is overrated. Authenticity is much more interesting. As the training session resumed with a lighter atmosphere, Marcus found himself thinking about masks, personas, and the difference between hiding who you are and protecting the people you care about. He still couldn't tell them the whole truth, but maybe he didn't need to. Maybe it was enough to let them see that he was flawed, uncertain, and occasionally in need of support. Small steps, he told himself. Trust builds gradually, and so does intimacy. No need to rush into emotional territory I'm not ready to navigate. But as he watched his teammates, his friends, work together with easy familiarity, Marcus realized that emotional territory might not be something he could avoid much longer. Chapter 14, The Zatana Factor. Zatara was trouble with a capital T, and Marcus recognized it the moment she started spending more time at Mount Justice. Not because she was malicious, quite the opposite. But because she had an uncanny ability to see through magical disguises, emotional barriers, and carefully constructed facades. And she seemed to find Marcus's carefully constructed facade particularly interesting. There's something unusual about your aura, she announced during what was supposed to be a casual conversation about tactical coordination. Marcus nearly dropped the tactical manual he'd been pretending to read. My what now? Your aura, Zatana repeated, settling cross-legged on the air beside his chair in a casual display of impossible physics. Everyone has one, kind of like an emotional fingerprint. Most people's auras are pretty straightforward. Yours is layered. Layered how? Like there are two people occupying the same space, Zatana mused, studying him with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. The surface layer is what everyone else sees, confident, tactical, appropriately aged. But underneath that, there's something older. More experienced. Fuck. Can she actually detect that I'm not really 16? Marcus tried to arrange his features into an expression of mild confusion instead of the panic he actually felt. That's an interesting theory, he said carefully. It's not a theory, Zatana replied. It's an observation. The question is what created that kind of layering. Magical influence. Psychological trauma. Time manipulation. Maybe I'm just mature for my age. Mature, yes. But this is different. This is like. She paused, clearly searching for the right words. Like someone who's lived through experiences they couldn't have had at their chronological age. Marcus felt sweat gather at his temples. This was exactly the kind of scrutiny he'd been trying to avoid, and it was coming from someone with supernatural perception abilities that made hiding nearly impossible. You have a very vivid imagination, he said. I have very good magical senses, Zatana corrected. And they're telling me that there's more to Kid Flash than meets the eye. Before Marcus could figure out how to respond without revealing too much or outright lying, Supergirl landed beside them with her usual graceful precision. Hey guys, she said, her smile bright enough to power a small city. What are you talking about? Zatana thinks I have an unusual aura, Marcus replied, grateful for the interruption. Really? What's unusual about it? It's complex, Zatana said, still studying Marcus with uncomfortable intensity. Like there are multiple layers of experience stacked on top of each other. Huh. Supergirl tilted her head, focusing on Marcus with that particular expression that suggested she was using her enhanced senses. You know, now that you mention it, there is something different about your biorhythm patterns. Oh, for the love of, my biorhythm patterns. Everyone has a unique physiological signature, Supergirl explained. Heart rate, breathing patterns, micro-expressions, that kind of thing. Yours are. Interesting. Interesting how? Like you're consciously controlling them, she said thoughtfully. Most people have natural variations in their baseline stress indicators. Yours are remarkably consistent, like you're actively managing your emotional responses. Maybe I just have good self-control. Maybe, Supergirl agreed. Or maybe you're working very hard to project a specific image. Marcus found himself caught between two sets of supernatural senses, both detecting inconsistencies in his carefully maintained cover story. This was rapidly becoming his worst nightmare. Look, he said, standing up with perhaps more abruptness than the situation warranted. I appreciate the supernatural analysis, but maybe some things are just private. Private. Zatana raised an eyebrow. Or secret. Is there a difference? Private means personal but not necessarily hidden, she explained. Secret means actively concealed for specific reasons. Your aura suggests secrets, not privacy. Because I'm literally living a lie and trying not to break the space-time continuum. Maybe you're reading too much into magical readings. And maybe you're working too hard to deflect perfectly reasonable questions, Supergirl observed. Before the conversation could venture further into dangerous territory, Wonder Woman entered the common area with her characteristic grace and presence. Ladies, Marcus, she greeted them with a warm smile. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just discussing Marcus's fascinating metaphysical complexity, Zatana said with obvious amusement. His what? Diana's expression shifted to mild confusion. Zatana thinks I have an unusual aura, Marcus explained, trying to sound casual rather than desperately grateful for another interruption. Supergirl thinks my biorhythms are too controlled. I see. Diana studied his face with those penetrating dark eyes. And what do you think? I think my teammates have very active imaginations and possibly too much time on their hands. Deflection again, Supergirl noted. It's not deflection if the question doesn't have a meaningful answer, Marcus replied. Every question has a meaningful answer, Diana said gently. Sometimes the answer is simply, I'm not ready to discuss this. That's different from pretending the question isn't valid. Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure starting to crack under the weight of their combined attention. Three incredibly perceptive women, each with supernatural abilities that made hiding his emotional state nearly impossible, all focused on the inconsistencies in his cover story. Time for strategic retreat. Asterisk. You know what? He said, forcing a casual tone. I just remembered I promised Barry I'd review some tactical scenarios with him. Rain check on the metaphysical analysis. He was moving toward the cave's exit before anyone could respond, using just enough super speed to make pursuit awkward without making his escape obvious. Unfortunately, Wonder Woman had superhuman reflexes and no compunctions about using them to intercept someone who was clearly running from an uncomfortable conversation. Marcus, she said, appearing in his path with that fluid grace that made her movement seem effortless. A word. So much for strategic retreat. I really do need to check in with Barry. Barry can wait 5 minutes, Diana replied firmly. This conversation cannot. She gestured toward a more private alcove of the cave, and Marcus realized he was trapped between following her or making his avoidance so obvious that it would raise even more questions. 5 minutes, he agreed reluctantly. The alcove offered privacy from the main common areas while still being technically public, the kind of space designed for conversations that needed to be discreet without being secret. Diana settled onto a stone bench and patted the space beside her in invitation. You're running, she observed as he sat down. I'm strategically repositioning, Marcus corrected. From your friends who are concerned about you. From my friends who are using supernatural abilities to analyze my personal psychology without my consent. Diana was quiet for a moment, considering his response. That's actually a fair point. Zatana and Kara were being intrusive, regardless of their intentions. Marcus felt some of his tension ease at her acknowledgement. Thank you. However, Diana continued, the fact that you felt the need to flee rather than simply saying, this conversation makes me uncomfortable, suggests that their observations touched on something significant. And we're back to dangerous territory. Maybe I just don't like being psychoanalyzed. Or maybe you're afraid of what they might discover. Marcus met her gaze directly. What if I am? What if there are things about me that are complicated? Things that might change how the team sees me? Then you decide whether those things are worth sharing, Diana replied simply. And you trust the people who care about you to respond with wisdom and compassion. And if they can't, if the things I'm hiding are too strange, too complicated, too dangerous to share, then you carry those burdens alone until you find people who can help you bear them, Diana said softly. But Marcus, you don't have to carry everything alone. Some secrets are meant to be shared, when the time is right and the people are trustworthy. The gentle understanding in her voice made Marcus's chest tighten with longing. He wanted to trust her, wanted to share the impossible weight of his situation, wanted to let someone else help him navigate the complex ethics of changing a timeline he'd once watched as entertainment. But he couldn't. Not without risking everything he'd worked to build, everything he'd fought to protect. What if the secret isn't really mine to share? He asked quietly. What if telling it would hurt people I care about? Then you find a way to be honest about what you can share while protecting what you can't, Diana replied. There's usually a middle ground between complete disclosure and complete deception. Marcus considered her words carefully. Maybe there was a way to be more honest about his situation without revealing the impossible truth. Maybe he could share enough of his real struggles to ease the burden of secrecy without breaking the universe. I'm not really 16, he said finally. Diana's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. How old are you? Old enough to know better, too young to know enough, Marcus replied. Old enough to understand the weight of the responsibilities I've taken on, but young enough to make mistakes that could hurt people I care about. That's remarkably vague for someone claiming to be more honest. It's as honest as I can be right now, Marcus said. The specifics are complicated. Complicated how? Marcus struggled to find words that were true without being revealing. Complicated in a way that involves other people's secrets, other people's safety, and consequences that go beyond just my personal situation. Diana studied his face for a long moment, her dark eyes searching for truth in his carefully chosen words. "You're protecting someone," she said eventually. "I'm protecting everyone," Marcus replied. "Including you." "From what?" "From the consequences of knowing things they're not ready to know yet." Diana was quiet for several minutes, processing his half-revelations and obvious evasions. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of understanding that made Marcus's chest warm. "I won't pretend to understand the specifics of your situation," she said. "But I recognize the weight of carrying knowledge that could hurt people if shared carelessly. That's a burden I'm familiar with." Marcus glanced at her, remembering her own complicated history with secrets, hidden knowledge, and the responsibility of protecting people from truths they weren't ready to handle. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for understanding that some things can't be shared, even when you want to." "Thank you for trusting me enough to share what you could," Diana replied. "It's a beginning." As they walked back toward the main areas of Mount Justice, Marcus found himself thinking about middle grounds, partial truths, and the delicate balance between authenticity and protection. He still couldn't tell his teammates everything, but maybe he could let them see enough of his real self to ease their concerns without revealing the impossible specifics of his situation. Small steps, he reminded himself. Trust builds gradually, and so does intimacy. But maybe it's time to take a few more steps. Chapter 15, Romantic Complications. Living with multiple beautiful, powerful women while maintaining appropriate emotional boundaries was challenging under the best of circumstances. When those women started showing obvious romantic interest, it became nearly impossible. Marcus realized the full extent of his problem during what should have been a routine team movie night. The team had gathered in Mount Justice's main common area to watch The Princess Bride, Megan's Choice, after she'd expressed curiosity about classical Earth romance stories. Somehow, Marcus had ended up on the main couch with Supergirl on one side and Artemis on the other, while Zatana had claimed the floor space directly in front of him. Miss Martian was curled up in a nearby chair, and Wonder Woman had taken a position on the couch's arm where she could easily participate in conversations. It would have been a perfectly normal social gathering if not for the fact that every woman in the room seemed to be paying more attention to him than to the movie. "This is ridiculous," Artemis muttered during the sword fight scene. "He's obviously the better fighter. Why doesn't he just end it quickly?" "Because it's not about winning efficiently," Supergirl replied without taking her eyes off the screen. "It's about proving his skill and honor." "Honor doesn't keep you alive in a real fight," Artemis pointed out. "No, but it makes victory meaningful," Wonder Woman added from her perch. "Sometimes how you win matters more than whether you win." Spoken like someone who's never lost a fight that mattered, Zatana observed with obvious amusement. "I've lost plenty of fights," Diana replied calmly. "But I've never lost one because I prioritized efficiency over principle." Marcus found himself caught in the middle of a philosophical debate about fighting styles, honor codes, and tactical priorities. Normally, he would have enjoyed the intellectual engagement. Tonight, he was distracted by the fact that Supergirl had somehow ended up pressed against his side, Artemis was playing with his hair while she talked, and Zatana kept shooting meaningful glances in his direction. "What do you think, Marcus?" Megan asked, clearly drawing him into the conversation. "Is honor worth tactical disadvantage?" "That depends on the stakes," Marcus replied, trying to ignore the way Kara's body warmth was affecting his concentration. "In a friendly duel, honor matters. In a life-or-death situation, survival takes priority." "But what if compromising your honor to survive makes the survival meaningless?" Diana asked. "Then you find a third option," Marcus said. "Creative problem-solving usually beats both pure honor and pure pragmatism." "See," Supergirl said, nudging him playfully. "This is why you're our tactical coordinator. Always thinking outside the box." The casual physical contact sent electricity up Marcus's spine, and he found himself acutely aware of how close she was sitting, how her costume clung to her figure, how her smile made his chest tighten in ways that were definitely inappropriate for their supposed age gap. "Focus, Chen," These are your teammates, not potential romantic partners. Asterisk. Unfortunately, his teammates seemed to have different ideas about the nature of their relationships. Marcus, Zatana said during the movie's romantic climax, have you ever been in love? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus could feel everyone's attention focus on him, waiting for his answer with an intensity that suggested his response would be analyzed for deeper meaning. Why do you ask? He said, stalling for time. Because you always give tactical advice about relationships like you're analyzing them from the outside, she explained. I wondered if you'd ever experienced the kind of emotional intensity that makes tactical thinking impossible. Only every day since I got here. Emotional intensity and tactical thinking aren't mutually exclusive. You can feel something deeply while still thinking clearly about the situation. Can you? Artemis asked, her fingers still playing with his hair. Because right now you seem like someone who's thinking very hard about something that should be simple. What should be simple? Whether you're attracted to anyone on the team, Supergirl said with characteristic directness. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. This was exactly the kind of conversation he'd been dreading, direct questions about romantic feelings that he couldn't answer honestly without revealing the complicated reality of his situation. That's complicated, he said finally. How is it complicated? McGann asked with obvious curiosity. Because workplace relationships are always complicated, Marcus replied, grasping for professional distance. The team functions because we trust each other. Romantic entanglements could damage that trust. Or strengthen it, Diana observed quietly. How? Love and trust aren't mutually exclusive, she explained. People who care deeply about each other often fight harder to protect each other, work better together, communicate more effectively. They also make emotionally compromised decisions, Marcus countered. Prioritize personal relationships over mission objectives. Take unnecessary risks to protect people they care about. You say that like it's a bad thing, Zatana said. It can be, in the wrong circumstances. And what circumstances would make caring about your teammates a bad thing? Supergirl asked. Marcus felt the conversation spiraling into territory he wasn't equipped to navigate. How could he explain that his feelings for them were complicated by the fact that he was technically an adult trapped in a teenager's body? How could he tell them that he was attracted to several of them simultaneously, which felt like emotional cheating even though they weren't actually in relationships? How could he admit that the age gap issues made him question the ethics of pursuing any romantic connection? I didn't say caring was bad, he said carefully. I said romantic entanglements were complicated. So you were attracted to someone on the team, Artemis said with obvious satisfaction. I didn't say that either. You didn't deny it, Zatana pointed out. Before Marcus could figure out how to extricate himself from the conversation without revealing too much, the movie's climactic scene provided a temporary distraction. But as the credits rolled and the team began discussing their reactions to the film, Marcus realized that the romantic subplot had created more questions than it had answered. That was beautiful, McGann said with obvious satisfaction. True love conquering all obstacles. Unrealistic, but entertaining, Artemis added. Why unrealistic? Supergirl asked. Because real relationships are messier than that. People have complicated feelings, conflicting loyalties, timing issues. It's never as simple as, true love conquers all. Maybe that's what makes it worth fighting for, Diana suggested. The complexity, the challenges, the need to choose love despite obstacles. Or maybe, Marcus said quietly, some obstacles are there for good reasons. Maybe some relationships are too complicated to pursue, regardless of the feelings involved. The room fell silent. Marcus could feel everyone looking at him, processing his words for deeper meaning. That sounds like someone talking from experience, Zatana observed. That sounds like someone making excuses, Supergirl corrected gently. For what? For being afraid to take emotional risks, she said. For hiding behind tactical analysis instead of admitting what you actually feel. Marcus met her gaze directly, seeing understanding and challenge and something that might have been invitation in her blue eyes. And what if what I actually feel is too complicated to act on? He asked. Then you find a way to make it less complicated, she replied simply. As the team dispersed to their various evening routines, Marcus found himself alone in the common area, staring at the blank screen and trying to process the evening's emotional revelations. His teammates weren't just friends anymore, they were potential romantic partners who seemed genuinely interested in pursuing deeper relationships with him. The problem was that pursuing those relationships would require either maintaining his deception about his real age and situation, or revealing truths that could destroy everything he'd worked to build. This is getting out of hand, he thought. But maybe that's exactly where I need to be. Chapter 16, The Weight of Deception. The crisis came, as most crises do, at the worst possible moment. Marcus was in the middle of what should have been a routine equipment maintenance session when his communicator buzzed with a priority alert. The message was from Barry Allen, marked urgent, and contained exactly 4 words: "We need to talk." That's never good. An hour later, Marcus stood in Star Labs' main conference room, facing not just the Flash, but also Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. The collective weight of their attention made him feel like he was about to be crushed by the gravitational pull of concentrated heroic authority. "Sit down, Wally," Barry said gently. Wally. Not Kid Flash, not Marcus. The name that belonged to the person everyone thought he was, but that felt increasingly foreign every time he heard it. "Is everything okay?" Marcus asked, settling into the uncomfortable chair across from them. "That's what we're trying to determine," Batman replied with typical directness. "We've been conducting a comprehensive security review of all young heroes associated with the Justice League." "Oh shit." Marcus tried to keep his expression neutral. "Okay. During that review, we discovered some inconsistencies in your background," Superman continued. "Nothing that suggests malicious intent, but enough to raise questions about your identity and origins." The room felt like it was shrinking around him. Marcus could hear his pulse in his ears, could feel sweat gathering at his temples, could sense the careful facade he'd built over the past months beginning to crumble. "What kind of inconsistencies?" he asked, proud of how steady his voice sounded. Batman activated a holographic display that showed a timeline of Wally West's life: school records, medical history, social connections, family relationships. Most of it looked accurate, which was impossible since Marcus had no memories of living any of those experiences. "Your academic performance shows a dramatic improvement in analytical thinking and strategic planning beginning approximately 6 months ago," Batman said, highlighting specific data points. "Your personality assessments indicate significant changes in social behavior, emotional intelligence, and leadership capacity." "People grow up," Marcus said weakly. "Not usually this dramatically or this quickly," Wonder Woman added. Her voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath it. "The psychological profiles suggest someone who gained years of experience and maturity in a matter of months." Additionally, Superman continued, "Your knowledge base includes information that shouldn't be available to someone with your official clearance level. Tactical assessments that demonstrate familiarity with classified operations, enemy psychology that suggests extensive study of criminal profiles you shouldn't have access to." Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. They knew. Maybe not the whole truth, but enough to know that he wasn't who he claimed to be. "Most concerning," Barry said quietly, "is that DNA analysis confirms you are genetically Wally West, but psychological evaluation suggests you might not actually be the person who grew up with those genetics." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the data display, seeing his carefully constructed identity laid bare in charts and graphs and statistical analyses. "So," he said finally, "what happens now?" "That depends on your answers to some very important questions," Batman replied. "Starting with, who are you really?" Marcus looked around the room at 4 of the most powerful and respected heroes on Earth, all waiting for him to explain the impossible truth about his situation. He could lie, try to maintain his cover story, hope they didn't have enough evidence to prove their suspicions. Or he could tell them the truth and hope they didn't decide he was too dangerous to let live. "Truth it is. My name is Marcus Chen," he said quietly. "I'm 26 years old, and until 6 months ago, I lived in a universe where all of you were fictional characters in an animated television series." The silence that followed was somehow even more deafening than before. Explain, Batman said eventually. So Marcus did. He told them about his life as a corporate middle manager, about falling asleep watching Young Justice, about waking up in Wally West's body with all of the original's memories but none of his personality. He explained about the meta-knowledge that let him predict enemy strategies and prevent disasters, about the constant fear of changing the timeline, about the impossible emotional complexity of caring for people who had originally been entertainment. When he finished, the four heroes sat in stunned silence, processing revelations that challenged their fundamental understanding of reality. Prove it, Batman said finally. How? Tell us something we don't know. Something that will happen in the future, something specific enough to verify. Marcus considered the request carefully. He needed something that would prove his knowledge without causing a paradox, something significant but not catastrophic. In 3 weeks, the team will face an opponent calling himself a Mazo, he said. An android capable of copying and combining the abilities of multiple heroes. It will initially appear to be attacking randomly, but it's actually gathering data for Professor Ivo's research into artificial intelligence and superhuman capability replication. Specific timing, known enemy, clear motivation, Superman observed. That's verifiable. If he's telling the truth, Wonder Woman added. If he's lying, we'll know soon enough, Barry said grimly. The question is what we do in the meantime. You're not going to eliminate me, Marcus asked carefully. You've spent 6 months protecting innocent lives and supporting your teammates, Diana replied. Whatever your origins, your actions suggest benevolent intent. Besides, Superman added, if you wanted to cause harm, you've had numerous opportunities to do so. The fact that you've consistently chosen to help people suggests that your moral character is intact, regardless of your unusual circumstances. Marcus felt a rush of relief so intense it was almost overwhelming. They believed him. More than that, they were willing to trust him despite the impossible nature of his situation. However, Batman continued, this situation raises significant security concerns. You have knowledge of future events that could be extremely valuable or extremely dangerous, depending on how it's used. I've been very careful not to change major events, Marcus protested. I've focused on preventing smaller disasters, improving team effectiveness, things that shouldn't have timeline implications. But you have changed things, Barry pointed out. The team's performance is significantly better than our projections suggested. Their coordination, their tactical effectiveness, their personal relationships, all of it has improved beyond what we expected. Is that a bad thing? That depends on the long-term consequences, Batman replied. Improved performance could mean fewer casualties and better mission outcomes. It could also mean they're unprepared for challenges that were originally meant to test them in specific ways. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He'd been so focused on helping his teammates avoid pain and failure that he hadn't considered whether those experiences might have been necessary for their development. What do you want me to do? He asked. Continue being yourself, Wonder Woman said. The Marcus Chen who's been protecting his teammates and serving with distinction. But also be more careful about the information you reveal and the changes you make. And if I see a disaster coming that I could prevent, then you prevent it, Superman replied firmly. Saving lives takes priority over timeline concerns. We'll monitor the situation, Batman added. If your presence starts causing more problems than it solves, we'll reassess. But for now, you remain part of the team. As the meeting concluded and Marcus prepared to return to Mount Justice, Barry pulled him aside for a private conversation. I want you to know, the Flash said quietly, that regardless of how you ended up here, I'm proud of the hero you've become. Wally, Marcus, whoever you are, you've done right by the people who count on you. Thank you, Marcus replied, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he was carrying. That means more than you know. One more thing, Barry added. The team doesn't need to know about this conversation unless you decide to tell them. As far as they're concerned, you're still just Kid Flash dealing with some complicated personal issues. Marcus nodded gratefully. He still had secrets to manage and relationships to navigate, but at least now he didn't have to carry the weight of deception entirely alone. One crisis down, he thought as he headed back to Mount Justice. Several more to go. But for the first time since his interdimensional commute began, Marcus felt like he might actually be able to handle whatever came next. Arc 3, Deeper Connections Chapters 17 to 36. Chapter 17, Honesty and Its Consequences. Telling the truth to the Justice League had been terrifying but ultimately liberating. Deciding whether to tell the truth to his teammates was proving to be significantly more complicated. Marcus spent 3 days after his confession to the senior heroes trying to figure out how much of his situation he could safely reveal to the team. The meta-knowledge was one problem, explaining how he knew things without revealing his interdimensional origins was nearly impossible. But the age gap issue was an even bigger concern, especially given the romantic undertones that had been developing in his relationships with several team members. The decision was taken out of his hands during what should have been a routine training session. "You've been different since your meeting with the League," Zatana observed as they worked through combat coordination drills. Marcus tried to focus on the tactical scenario they were running, a simulated hostage rescue that required precise timing and communication. "Different how?" "More relaxed," Supergirl said, landing gracefully beside them after completing her part of the exercise. "Like you've been carrying something heavy and finally put it down." "Maybe I have," Marcus admitted. "Want to share with the class?" Artemis asked, joining their conversation with obvious curiosity. Marcus looked around at his teammates, people who had become more important to him than he'd ever intended, who deserved honesty but might not be ready for the impossible truth about his situation. "Batman said the team didn't need to know unless I decided to tell them. But maybe they do need to know, at least some of it. Asterisk. Can we sit down for this?" Marcus asked. "It's complicated." 10 minutes later, the team was assembled in Mount Justice's main common area, all eyes focused on Marcus with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. He took a deep breath and tried to figure out where to begin. "I haven't been entirely honest with you about who I am," he said finally. "None of us have been entirely honest about who we are," Robin replied. "That's kind of the point of secret identities." "This is different," Marcus said. "This is about fundamental assumptions you've made about me that might not be accurate." The room fell silent, waiting for him to continue. "I'm not 16, he said, echoing his earlier conversation with Wonder Woman. "How old are you?" Aqualad asked quietly. Marcus considered several possible answers, all technically true, but with different implications. He could say he was chronologically 16 but mentally older. He could claim accelerated aging or time manipulation. He could reveal the full truth about his interdimensional displacement. 26, he said finally. "I'm 26 years old, trapped in a 16-year-old body, with memories and experiences that don't match this life." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could see his teammates processing the revelation, trying to understand its implications for their relationships and team dynamics. "That's," McGann started, then stopped, clearly struggling with the concept. "Impossible," Marcus suggested. "Yeah, I know how it sounds." "How?" Superboy asked bluntly. "That's the complicated part," Marcus replied. "The specifics involve classified information and events that could be dangerous if they became public knowledge. But the important thing is that while my body is 16, my mind and emotions are those of an adult." "An adult who's been pretending to be a teenager for months," Artemis said slowly. "An adult who's been trying to figure out how to navigate an impossible situation without hurting people he cares about," Marcus corrected. "By lying to us," Zatana pointed out. "By protecting you from information that could have put you in danger," Marcus replied. The Justice League knew. Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, they all agreed that the details were classified for security reasons. "But the age thing wasn't classified," Supergirl said, her voice carrying a note of hurt. "You could have told us that." Marcus met her gaze directly, seeing confusion and betrayal in her blue eyes. "Could I? How do you tell your teammates that you're actually a decade older than you appear? How do you explain that every interaction you've had has been complicated by that age gap?" "By being honest," she replied firmly. "And risk destroying the team dynamic. Risk making everyone question every decision I've made, every piece of advice I've given, every relationship we've built." You don't get to make that decision for us, Artemis said, her voice sharp with anger. You don't get to decide what we can and can't handle. Marcus felt his chest tighten at the hurt in her voice. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of, that the truth would damage the relationships he'd worked so hard to build. You're right, he said quietly. I should have trusted you with the truth earlier. I was afraid of losing what we'd built together. What exactly did we build together? Zatana asked. Because if it was based on a lie. It wasn't based on a lie, Marcus said firmly. Every moment of caring, every tactical decision, every time I put your safety above my own, that was real. The age thing doesn't change the fact that I genuinely care about all of you. But it changes the context of that caring, Wonder Woman said as she entered the common area. Marcus turned to see her approaching with her characteristic grace, her expression unreadable. Diana, he asked, confused by her presence. I thought the team deserved to hear this conversation, she explained. And you deserved support while having it. Did you know? Robin demanded. About his real age. I suspected, Diana replied honestly. His emotional maturity, his tactical expertise, his knowledge base, all suggested someone with more life experience than his apparent age would allow. And you didn't tell us? Supergirl asked, her voice carrying a note of betrayal. It wasn't my truth to tell, Diana replied calmly. And Marcus was clearly struggling with how to share information that he felt could harm the relationships he valued. So everyone knew except us, McGann said quietly. The people who actually work with him every day. Marcus felt the weight of their hurt and anger like a physical blow. He'd spent months building trust and rapport with these people, and now he was watching it crumble because of his deception. I wanted to tell you, he said. Every day, I wanted to be honest about who I really am. But I was terrified that the truth would change everything. It has changed everything, Aqualad said quietly. The question is whether it's changed it for better or worse. How could this possibly be better? Artemis demanded. He's been lying to us for months. He's been protecting us for months, Wonder Woman corrected gently. Using knowledge and experience that he couldn't safely reveal to help us become better heroes and better people. While pretending to be someone he's not. While being exactly who he needed to be for this team, Diana replied firmly. The age gap doesn't change the fact that he's consistently put your well-being above his own, that he's made tactical decisions that saved lives, that he's been a loyal friend and trusted teammate. Marcus looked around the room at the faces of people who had become more important to him than he'd ever intended. Some showed hurt and betrayal, others confusion and uncertainty. But underneath it all, he could see the relationships they'd built, damaged, perhaps, but not destroyed. I know this changes things, he said quietly. I know it makes every interaction we've had more complicated. But I need you to know that my caring for you, my commitment to this team, my willingness to put your safety above my own, none of that was fake. Even the romantic stuff? Supergirl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked at her, at the hurt in her eyes, the vulnerability in her posture, the hope she was trying to hide, and felt his heart break a little. Especially the romantic stuff, he said honestly. Which is why it's been so complicated. How do you navigate feelings like that when there's a decade of life experience between you? How do you pursue a relationship that might be based on an emotional connection that can't be ethically acted upon? By being honest about the situation and letting the other person make an informed decision, she replied. And what if that honesty could have hurt you? What if it could have damaged the team dynamics that keep all of us safe? Then you take that risk because the people you care about deserve the truth, Zatana said firmly. Marcus nodded slowly, accepting their judgment. You're right. All of you. I should have trusted you with the truth earlier, regardless of the complications. I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air for several minutes while his teammates processed everything they'd learned. Eventually, Aqualad broke the silence. What happens now? He asked. Now we figure out how to move forward, Wonder Woman said. With honesty, with understanding, and with recognition that people are complicated and relationships require work. Can we trust him? Robin asked bluntly. You've been trusting him for months, Diana pointed out. His age doesn't change the decisions he's made or the loyalty he's shown. If anything, it explains why his tactical judgment has been so consistently sound. But the romantic complications, Megan started, are something that needs to be addressed carefully and honestly, Diana finished. Age gaps in relationships can be problematic, but they're not automatically disqualifying. What matters is power balance, emotional maturity, and mutual respect. Marcus felt a flicker of hope at her words, but tempered it with realism. Even if his teammates could accept his deception, the romantic aspects of his relationships would need to be completely reevaluated. I understand if things need to change, he said. If the romantic undertones we've been developing need to stop, if you need distance to process this information, if you don't trust me the same way anymore. I get it. We need time, Supergirl said finally. Time to think about what this means, time to figure out how we feel about it, time to decide what we want moving forward. Time to decide if we can trust you again, Artemis added. Fair enough, Marcus replied. Take all the time you need. I'll still be here, still committed to the team, still willing to do whatever it takes to protect all of you. As his teammates dispersed to process the revelation in their own ways, Marcus found himself alone with Wonder Woman in the common area. That went better than I expected, she observed. Did it? Because it felt like watching everything I've built fall apart. Trust doesn't fall apart that easily, Diana said gently. It gets damaged, tested, strained, but if it's real, it survives. Your teammates are hurt and confused, but they're also thinking about